Yeah. So you need.
We're live. You're feeling better?
Okay, we're live, so you gotta be good now. So we'll call the meeting to order, and it's the approval of the agenda, order of business, and we have a variety of things. We have some recognition, staff recognitions to do. We have a new employee to introduce. I need to move 6.2 up to where 6.1 is. And 10.2 is removed from the agenda. That will be a little later date. And that's it for me. Anybody else? Anything?
I'll move to approve the amended agenda.
Second. Discussion. All those in favor? Opposed? The motion is carried. Okay, so I think the first thing we'll do is introduce our new employee. So Gareth, that's. Oh, okay. Okay. Well, I just saw you said.
Yeah. Waiting for 6.2. Good morning, Council. I just wanted to take a couple of minutes to introduce our new development officer. So Elaine from Shaw has joined the community development team, and will be working alongside Heather Archibald in terms of development officer duties. And so we're really fortunate to have Elaine here, and she comes with a vast background in planning and development from some Ontario roots. And so we're really pleased to have Elaine with us and to bring all that expertise to our team and to be able to work with our team in the community development department. So and we just want to take an opportunity to introduce Elaine to everybody. And a couple of you may have met Elaine.
Met
She was at the
at the
Christmas
party.
party.
Yeah, which is good, yeah. Yeah, and we're very fortunate to have you, because we need them. We need the extra help.
This means the wait times are going to be cut in half, right?
Well, depends on how hard you work. We'll find out. That'll be part of the evaluation, Gary.
Glad to be here. Very nice to meet all of you.
Do you have anything you want to tell us about yourself?
Well, I'm a new resident in Nova Scotia. My husband and I fell in love with Nova Scotia about 10 years ago. And we've been very fortunate to come back on holidays quite a few times. And then we both retired a little over a year ago, and that was our opportunity to settle in the area. And very happy to be here. I found people are so welcoming and friendly and helpful, as well as our municipal team here have been the same way. And it's really nice to be warmly welcomed into an organization. I've also set roots here by volunteering, and I like to be involved in a number of different community activities. I'm involved with the Chester Basin and New Ross Lions Club.
Oh,
I volunteer with the Playhouse, and I also sit on the board of directors for Habitat for Humanity Nova Scotia, because affordable housing is one of my passions. So I'm very pleased to assist that group. And so that keeps me very busy. And I'm also learning to play the fiddle. So
Oh,
new for that. And that's a good challenge.
We
for me.
usually ask people if they play or sing.
No singing. Trust me, you don't want to hear me sing.
No. Andre will sing, you just play.
That's a little bit about me, and I'm really glad to be here. And this is a good time of year to start.
No, it's great to have you.
Sounds like we're very fortunate to get you actually to contribute well to the community, and great, thank you.
Anybody else, any questions or comments?
Welcome.
Just welcome.
Well,
Yes.
look forward to working with you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so now Tammy Ham wasn't able to join us last meeting, so we have a 20-year service award. Tammy? Oh. Congratulations and thank you for
Thank
20 years. It's a long while. Get the middle. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now it's my pleasure to present Platinum Jubilee medals to 5 of our staff members, or at least I think all 5 are here, for their service, particularly during COVID, and the extra effort that they put into making sure that we were all safe and the community was safe, and that we managed to accomplish what needed to be accomplished. And these awards aren't from us, they're from Lieutenant Governor. Yeah. I'm not him, but I'm next best thing. So Betty Mulrooney. lovely medal.
Thank
We gotta get a picture.
Congratulations, Ben.
Thank you. See the medal?
Yeah, we should show that, we should show the,
Medal.
Show the medal.
yeah.
Maybe
Maybe what I'll do is start passing one around and the last recipient can, should have done its, tour by the time the last.
Ben Swinnerman. Keep everybody.
That's right.
Go you. And I guess this was it, I'm assuming.
I wish we did it in person.
In person. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you.
Ryan Smith. Jody Conrad. Oh, him. Jody, thank you. Bruce Blackwood. Congratulations, thank you. Thank you.
Probably at the front end, I should have indicated that the Lieutenant Governor's office had asked all municipalities to submit names for municipal staff members. And the focus of the medal, in view of the pandemic circumstances, was on activity that was conducted that supported communities and supported the provision of municipal services. So it was the department head team that nominated the 5 candidates for their work and their role in their communities. So congratulations to all the recipients.
Thank you. If you got nothing better to do, you can stay for the rest of the meeting.
See you later.
Okay, we're on to public input and there is not any. So it's minutes of the previous meeting, committee of the whole, December the 1st, any errors or omissions? Hearing none, would somebody move approval?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Discussion, all those in favor? Opposed, motion's carried. Public presentations, I'm unaware of any. Okay, so we're on to 6.2. Arts and culture.
Good morning. Good morning. All right, so I'm going to be leading this and it's going to be here for support. Emotional. So this morning, staff will be presenting the proposed scope of work with options for fulfilling the arts and culture strategy. To do this, I'll outline the current situation, discuss brief background, give the high-level scope of work, budgetary impacts, and options for council's consideration. So the current situation, this scope of work has been prepared through industry consultation and jurisdictional scans. Through this research, the importance of robust ongoing consultation with various stakeholders to create the basis for an informed arts and culture strategy was highlighted. While the stakeholder consultation is very important, it is also very expensive. Through this same research, it appears that approach incorporating robust stakeholder communication will be approximately double the current amount of $25,000 earmarked for this fiscal. So the background, the arts and culture strategy is flagged as high priority for the 2021-2024 strategic plan. This development of an arts and culture strategy also supports MOC's overarching economic development strategy. This overarching strategy serves as MOC's roadmap to become more investment-ready, business-friendly, and economically diverse. An arts and culture strategy is important to the municipality of Chester, as we have a higher concentration of arts, entertainment, and recreation workers when compared to the rest of Lunenburg County as a whole. Our creative economy positively impacts the quality of life, attracts more creators and innovators, and contributes to our community's prosperity. Public sector bodies around the world have identified the importance of an arts and culture strategy as essential in their organizational direction. This rise in popularity can be attributed to communities translating their cultural uniqueness into a key component of their brand, thereby leveraging their uniqueness as a powerful marketing tool. To determine the potential scope of an arts and culture strategy, staff conducted research on 10 communities that have undertaken similar strategies. The communities and the contents of their respective strategies are identified in the table on page 3 of the RFP. The key takeaway is the importance of robust community engagement that occurs from the onset and is ongoing throughout the strategy development. To build on this research, staff conducted further qualitative data via one-on-one interviews with 3 of the communities outlined within the table. Through these interviews, there was further emphasis placed on the importance of comprehensive community engagement from the onset. Now, arts and culture strategies are hard to define, but the purpose is to lay a foundation for the strengthening of arts and culture within the municipality of Chester. Anecdotal evidence supports the powerful role cultural planning has in relation to revitalizing local economies and bolstering sense of pride and excitement in a community. As emphasized earlier, a vital element is deep engagement with arts and culture stakeholders in the community. While this is true of all strategies, it's imperative to an arts and culture strategy. This can be attributed to the absence of a one-size-fits-all approach, meaning what is successful in one town, city, or community cannot be applied to another area with the expectation of the same results. The scope presented within the RFD is very high level. It's typical of any strategy, but where the arts and culture strategy differs is the importance of meaningfully engaging with many different sectors, industries, organizations, as illustrated by the graphic on page 6. The scope of work entails 4 components, which are high level and might change with consultant feedback. I won't read the entire scope. It's on pages 4 and 5 of the RFD, but the components within are an example I'll pull and read as follows. Preparation and project vision, so things like a literature review, data collection, stakeholder engagement, focusing on robust consultation via innovative and fresh ways. So analysis such as a SWOT analysis, action plan informs the strategy and identifies specific projects. So budget impacts. In discussion with 2 consultants that work in the sector, high-level estimates are in the range of $50,000 to $75,000. However, without putting the request for proposals out to market, it's difficult to get exact costing. At present, $25,000 is earmarked for the strategy.
Okay.
So staff based the initial estimate on other projects like the sector opportunity assessment and the business retention and expansion project. As was indicated earlier, deep stakeholder engagement is vital to the development of an arts and culture strategy. This is made more expensive as it's not siloed sector specific approach, but one that touches on many sectors, nonprofits, societies, etc. So it's difficult for staff to determine how much a particular component of the recommended scope of work would cost. With that being said, staff recognize that scope of work, which is approximately double the allotted money, needs options for council's consideration. So the 4 options are as follows. Option 1, staff lead the preparation project vision component, as well as the data collection, stakeholder engagement, and hire a consultant for the analysis and action plan components. This option would have an impact on the time it takes to complete the project, would rely on limited staff knowledge and expertise for foundational components, could compromise data due to personal biases, and that could potentially be mitigated with a third party. This option still allows for the big picture third party review on analysis and action plan sections. So option 2 would be hire a consultant for the data collection stakeholder engagement portion only. The rest of the scope of work would be staff-led. This results in similar issues as outlined with option 1, but would result in better data to inform the analysis and action plan, as well as prioritizing the essential component of stakeholder engagement. So it's important to know that both option 1 and option 2 will have an impact on staff work plans as outlined in the RFD.
Yeah.
So option 3 would be to direct staff to issue a request for proposal document without a detailed scope of work, with the expectation that consultants would respond with a proposed scope of work, budget, and timeline. This option might result in no bids. Projects could have significant differences in scope, timeline, budget, and deliverables. There's a risk of stakeholder engagement suffering, but could result in faster project completion. Option 4, approve recommended scope of work and direct staff to issue RFP without including the budget in the RFP document. This option could result in more money than council is comfortable spending, but it might determine how much these strategies do in fact cost. The strategy is foundational, and staff believe it's important to have a strong base. This option could also result in a faster completion time. So staff is looking for a direction and discussions surrounding the 4 options, and I would be happy to field any questions.
Well, I mean, I think based on the discussions we've had here recently, that we believe that it's important that this work get done. I think it's also important that we not put off the other work that we think is important that it gets done. So, I don't know, I mean, I think we should go with, like, say, option 4, find out how much it costs, and then decide whether or not we're prepared to spend it. But I think we're gonna have to, but that's my opinion.
Yeah, I think that obviously we have to get this done, and we've identified it as a high priority and a strategic plan. So if you're doing a jurisdictional scan and you're seeing that budget allocation of 25,000 is inadequate, and more, you're expecting something in that $50,000 to $60,000 range. You know, I do like having some sort of boundaries supplied to the client, so we don't get a whole bunch of $150,000 proposals.
Yeah.
I would actually suggest sort of like, I agree with your comment, Alan, that we don't want to use staff resources to do this, because we already have a whole bunch of work allocated for you to do, and frankly, that work is better suited for your skill set, and this is outside of your, probably, it's a little specialized, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think that makes sense, you know, to go outside for this. I would actually propose that council authorize another $30,000 or $40,000 of budget for this project, and then we can define it for the consultant, and we take it from reserve or whatever.
Well, I mean, we have a reserve for economic development activity, so I mean, it's not like we impact the budget per se. Yeah, it's just a question. I mean, I look to you guys to really tell me, okay, what's the next step for us? But I agree that it's important that we do it, and I do not want to have other work that's also important not get done. So that means we got to spend more money. What does everybody else?
I agree. It's, well, obviously we've been talking about this now for some time, so I didn't know this report was coming, but I'm glad to see it timely. And I agree, we have them funds put away, we have lots of money to do this job, and it's important to move forward. I know staff is busy, so a consultant is the way to get it done. I'm not a big consultant person, but I know you guys are busy. And yeah, I agree.
Yes,
Jim,
yes.
Jerry.
Just like a little explanation, I don't want to put you on the spot.
Details.
Just a little distinction between what you would do with option 1 as opposed to option 2. Which one of those two would be what you would prefer?
I mean, what I would,
Both are staff led.
What do you want done?
well,
Left
Between the-
up to yourself, what would you do?
Or maybe my question actually, what's the difference between 1 and 2?
1 and 2. So personally, I would opt for option 2. Because I think given the option of between 1 and 2, because I think with an arts and culture strategy, like the data collection and the stakeholder engagement is so important, that I think that would be best done by a consultant.
And that would require an RFP as well. So now, you can ask your question, because I want to get a distinction and your thoughts on one too, because I was looking at those as maybe preferable, but are these options in order, or are they, do you have a preferred option? I think that was the warden's question.
The preferred option would be option 4. Yeah. But if I had to choose between 1 and 2, it would be 2.
Yeah, but 4 is your preference.
4 would be
Okay.
the preference for you.
Or as you prepare an RFP,
Yeah.
we have a look at that, see what it is you're all asking for. And we would just have to be prepared to spend more money depending on the results of what came back.
Presumably in the RFP, we could put a limit on the amount.
Authorize more budget.
Yeah, we don't want the public to know how much money we're allocating necessarily.
When you do that, most come in at that amount.
Yeah, so you kind of don't tell them how much you're prepared to spend.
Yeah, and it comes down to the percentage you put on the evaluation criteria too. And
Yeah.
the market does tend to sort of work that out a little bit. If someone's way expensive, then I think it's 30% plus or minus from the median, then they can, we know that they're either not understanding the scope or they're overpriced or those kinds of reasons.
Yeah, I think
Versus
you
putting a
guys
budget
prepare
in
the
there.
RFP, we send it out, we see what we get back. And then you recommend somebody and we determine, yeah, like if we set a budget for $100,000, then everybody's gonna come in at $100,000, and you don't wanna do that.
But if we approve 4 at this point, there's no expenditure included in that, that's not already budgeted.
No, they can go do the RFP, no problem.
And then we can come back.
Then you come back with what we get back.
I would say it's likely based on where we are now and our
We know it's gonna be more money.
current fiscal year. Don't know what the timing is that.
It'll be next year.
Do you think that the activity and would bleed over until next fiscal year?
It definitely.
It will,
Yes.
so my gut tells me is that like your current budget is probably adequate for this year, and we would add what's required in next fiscal year into your budget and you would finalize it then. We would identify a source of funds. The Economic Development Fund is a great target.
Okay, so are we comfortable with them going away and doing that? Oh,
I
sorry.
just have, so when you put the RFP out, so the consultant, would you, of course, will come back to ask what you're gonna ask the consultant for, like Floyd said, we've had reports that have so much stuff in it and consultants reports that it's gonna be targeted to what you want, I assume, what you wanna know, like
What we need.
data collection, stakeholder engagement, that sort of thing, yeah. As long as it's not so broad that, yeah, okay, that's all I want to know.
We do want their opinion on things too, because they are the experts in the field.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
so that was noted in the RFD that it could be subject to change based on consultants' feedback, but.
Okay, so that seems to be the direction ahead that we'll do it.
Great, thank you very much.
Sure would appreciate a motion on that. Yes.
Well, okay, so a motion to approve option 4.
Thank you, Al.
Yeah. Second. Discussion, all those in favor, opposed, motion carried. Yes, you'd like clarity on your direction. Thank you.
Well done with it.
Okay, 6.1.
Excitement.
Good morning, council. So I have for you today a quick report and then a bunch of slides to go through. The report is in essence what I'm calling a check-in on the village plan review, which we haven't done with you since March of 2021 when I look back in my notes. So just quickly, the village plan review project basically initiated following the completion of our municipal plan review in 2020. And began by working with the Village Planning Advisory Committee as sort of the overseeing committee for that project. quick review on the sort of the public engagement. Obviously, that was affected by, staff resources, but also in a significant way by COVID and the gathering limits and restrictions, that kind of thing. So 2020 was mostly online engagement through our Voices and Choices website. We also did manage to do a few pop-up events at Picnic at the Park and some other events in the village where we kind of tagged along. And at that point, it was a pretty high level, what we're asking, what concerns you? We're introducing the idea of a plan review and just trying to get general feedback and input. We did have a few topics that we had identified to try to get information from, but it was pretty broad based at that point. 2021, unfortunately, we still had those gathering limits in place, but we had an excellent summer planning student, Jordan, and he worked with me and did a lot of the legwork on the resident survey. So that was the survey we sent out to every household in the village, and we got over a 30% response rate on that. So we were very pleased with that. And the preliminary results were brought forward to council in it was late August or September of 2021. So we've got that and been reviewing that, and that will definitely be an important source of information as we move forward into sort of the decision-making stages. And then this year, obviously, the FBM study and consultant study was a big piece of work that was done, and again brought back to council in terms of those recommendations, mostly aimed around architectural controls, but there were also some other sort of elements that tipped into the planning and land use realm as well. So we've got that report as well, and there was obviously public engagement at the Legion and some online engagement for that as well. And then finally, with our summer co-op student this year, John, he and I hosted the what we call the Highway 3 workshop to sort of talk about the Highway 3 area, which was not included in the FBM study. So we felt FBM had covered sort of a little bit more than half in the core, and then we were covering the other Highway 3 and sort of outer residential areas. So we've got all that information. We've got a lot of information, and it's good. And when we start to review it, or when I start to go through it, I'm actually really pleased with how much feedback we have, and it really has started to hone in on particular topics. Many of them were ones that we expected would be, hot topics of debate. And so I am, I guess, of the opinion that we're now getting to the point where we're ready to hopefully get a draft ready for review by BPAC, by council, and then ultimately by the public before we look at adoption. So there had been, I think it was actually at the end of the FBM discussion here at council, there's been a little bit of discussion about how we wanted that drafting stage to go, or what level of detail council wanted to see at this point versus waiting until we got to a fully prepared draft. So that was what I thought we could start with here, was sort of talk about some of those options. So I've outlined three options that felt, all of them feel reasonable to me, and it's really just a matter of kind of similar to some of the last discussions, minus the budget. It's about sort of timing and how much revision we do at what stage.
Yeah.
And I would say I don't necessarily have a preference here. It's really for discussion, and I'd be happy to speak to maybe the pros and cons of each. But so option one as a starting point would be starting with today's session. The next step for us this morning is to go through some slides that I have. I'm calling them the priority topics. They're basically issues, combination of staff identified, but mostly what we've been hearing in public engagement. And so I have some staff comments and then sort of an intended direction. And the thought here is we'll go through those slides, and if council wants to provide high level direction on that, if council's not happy with the direction that they see mentioned on the slides, let me know, and then I'll incorporate that now. So with option one, we would start with that review, and then the staff would go off and draft or create draft one of the new secondary plan and land use bylaw. We would then bring that draft to the Village Planning Advisory Committee. We would record their comments, but we wouldn't make changes at that point.
Yeah.
We would then take draft one to the public and similarly collect comments. Exactly how we do that would probably be at least 1 or 2 in-person engagement events, as well as putting the document online for a significant amount of time to let people download it or get a paper copy from the office and go through it. But we'd also have our typical open house town hall sort of at the Legion or somewhere else.
Yeah.
Then what we would do is, once we had that feedback from VPAC and from the public, we would bring draft one and all of that feedback to council. And then based on that discussion, we would create draft two, which we would then look to move forward towards a public hearing. I guess at the high level, there's some efficiency there in terms of timelines. We're not going through a whole lot of drafts. We basically have an initial draft that goes VPAC, public, and then gets changed through discussions at council, and then we're moving to adoption. Option two would basically be quite similar to option one, except we would start with council with draft one rather than starting with VPAC. So that would give council another opportunity, kind of like today, to say, wait a second, we've got questions about this particular item or that item.
Yeah, so before you go to village plan
Right.
and all that, make these changes.
We come back here with draft one first. And then option three would essentially see us take draft one to the Village Planning Advisory Committee, get their comments, come back to council with VPAC comments. So it hasn't been publicly released yet. I mean, VPAC meetings are open to the public, but we're not posting it online. We're not having that session at the Legion. So we come back with VPAC's comments, and then with a discussion at council, create draft two, and then draft two would be released to the public. And then we would come back with the public comments and do a final draft. So there'd be an extra, basically with option three, there's an extra draft, but it gives a little more check-in with council. It's not off being commented on for such a long period of time as it is in option one. So there's pros and cons to all of them in terms of like efficiencies and then the thoroughness of the engagement and then the level of input from council. So there's
You've been at this for how long?
2 years, it was, I would say January 2020 was when it officially began, and it hasn't been continuous.
No, I know. it's not
Resourcing,
bad.
and that's honestly not so much because of COVID, it's more resources. And when we got ramped up with a bunch of day-to-day projects, it fell off the priority list for time. So it hasn't been 2.5 years of solid continuous work on it, I guess I put it that way. Yeah. So I know there's a lot there, so yeah.
Okay, Derek. You start there.
I don't like option three as much because it's going to delay the process, right?
Yeah, there definitely would be more time with option three.
That doesn't really add that much. It's just, would there be a delay going to option two, going to council and then?
It would depend on how much, if any, changes happened after that council meeting. So in option two, I say staff present draft one to council, staff present draft one to VPAC. If there was enough feedback at council that we actually ended up really with a draft two, then you could maybe say, in option two, step 4 could be staff present draft two to VPAC. So I think that
It's not going to change the final package.
not likely, unless when I brought draft one to council, there
We
was,
changed it.
exactly, if you
Yeah.
gave me direction that we're not happy to have this go to VPAC, well, then of course we would
Or you're,
Revise.
make those changes.
you're giving us pretty much the highlights in your slideshow anyway.
Yeah, it's impossible to give you everything. You'll see in the slides, not everything is fully fleshed out and developed, but I'm trying to give you
Yes.
as much detail as I feel I have at this point,
Yeah.
but
How's that?
Oh, I was just sort of talking, option two is my favorite because I think it's time. It's time to move
option
on.
two might be in terms of,
The most.
it has the potential to be the shortest timeline, similar to option one, but it also gives that extra little, just check in with council. If you're good with draft one, then we go to VPAC, and if perchance there's something in there we want to change, we have that ability to do
Just
it.
for the record, my preference is option two.
Okay, Andre, you had some comments.
Well, just that my preference is also option two. I like that comes here first. Then we make sure that this is in line with our thinking, and then we gather comments from committees and things like that, just to make sure there's nothing we overlooked, rather than having them steer it to someplace maybe we don't even want to go, and then we receive those comments.
And then we gotta send it all back because we changed it. Yeah. It makes the most sense to me.
I'm just concerned with delay, and I don't think that would delay it. I think it would speed it up.
It's the most efficient process, I think. So are we ready to go with that? I mean, you can,
Yeah,
to be honest with you, I mean, I just, We can look at all the slides we want. What we want is the report, the draft document.
Document, yeah. And that's what this will set us on the path for.
Yeah,
basically.
there you
Yeah.
Okay, motion to go with option 1, 2, moved,
So,
second,
Second.
discussion, all those in favor, opposed, motion carried. The most efficient process, that's
Great.
what we want.
And I guess what I'll say here as we move into the slides is we can have as little or as much discussion as we want on each one of them. So if it's good, then we'll move on, we can go through this quickly, but if there's this is why I just wanted, again, this is sort of that check-in opportunity, so.
Yeah, and I think actually that we should, some focus on this today will also support a quicker.
Yes, yeah,
Process.
Oh, yeah, it could impact the way you draft.
absolutely,
Done a
yeah.
good slide deck, and I think we should spend some time today just.
it is a good slide deck, and I like what I've seen. I'm interested in your comments, but I limited involvement over the last year. You seem to have hit all the highlights that we discussed in all the meetings.
That was it.
Just turn it into words.
Yeah, that's the plan, and, Yeah.
Anyways.
so these are in no particular order, it was really just, I had a running list, so, and some of these will be familiar from FBM or from Highway 3 or from even early on discussions about the plan review, so the first one is to remove the water access zone. So on the little map here, the water is the light blue, and then that band that it actually looks like land, but it follows the coastline, that band of darker blue is currently called the water access zone. It's a little bit of an oddity because typically municipal control ends at the high water mark. Where it doesn't end at the high water mark is if something's attached to the shore, like a wharf. We do have permitting ability on a wharf, even though it extends beyond the high water mark. But in my opinion, the water access zone was well intentioned, but it actually creates a little bit of confusion in terms of that municipal authority. And I believe that there are ways of limiting infill, which is one of the purposes of the zone, through other provisions in the land use bylaw. So the recommended or intended direction there is going to be remove that zone and carry forward any of the relevant provisions in other zones or general provisions section of the land use bylaw. That one had been mentioned before in brief, and
There it is.
yes, absolutely.
Is that mainly because of jurisdiction issue?
That's my take on it. Yeah, is it just creates a little bit of, I don't know if confusion, but it would be more clear if I believe if we write it in other ways. And there's I think potentially a discussion to be had about whether we even want to be permitting wharves, because there are jurisdictional issues on that. We have the ability to say where you can put it on your shoreline, but then there's all kinds of complications if you have sections of wharves and what you can do at the end of the wharf, where we really, it's Department of Natural Resources or federal jurisdiction there. So yes, that's I guess, key part of why that is where we're looking to go.
I think that what we discussed in the past is the problems really ought to step forward, to
Yes.
clarify this jurisdictional issue.
Yeah.
It is unclear.
Yeah.
And oftentimes.
Right. And then water lots are another complication on there too. There's another level of, ownership, and yeah,
We get a lot of questions.
and we have a whole bunch of them, so.
I'm interested in your comment about maybe we would issue permits for wharves.
Mhm.
On what basis can we in fact issue permits for wharves in federal or provincial
So
jurisdiction?
because they are connected above the high water mark, that does fall within our jurisdiction. So we do issue development permits for wharves right now. There is, I think, I should say in the village, outside of the village, we don't regulate wharves. And all we really do right now is we have side yard setbacks. So, a wharf has to be 5 feet from your neighbor's property line, or from your property line with your neighbor. And that's really all that it does. Beyond that, it goes to Transport Canada in terms of how long it can be and whether it's getting into navigable waterways, and Department of Natural Resources if there's other questions with the construction that so typically they would require a permit from Department of Natural Resources and then a development permit in the village right now to do a wharf. And I guess the question we may have is that side yard setback, is that really doing anything? And is there a much of a purpose to it. And there may be, so it's not to say that we don't.
Well, I remember when we brought it in.
Yeah.
But being part of the discussion, and we have a lot of water lots that are quite narrow.
Mhm.
And then I remember sitting down with Jeff as the planner at the time saying, well, in theory, every one of these water lots could have a wharf.
Right.
And they could literally be, you could walk from one wharf to the other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we thought, well,
We
maybe
tried to separate.
there should be
Yeah,
some control
right.
here, so that it has to be at least a minimum distance.
And so we can absolutely maintain that, and removing the water access zone doesn't necessarily mean that we're not gonna issue permits for wharves. Those are two separate issues, yeah.
Next slide.
Okay, yeah. So the next one is hopefully fairly straightforward. This little chunk of blue is currently the rural zone that as part of our municipal plan adoption, the village boundary shrunk to match the actual Chester Village municipal boundary. And as part of this, we had this little remnant area of rural zone here. That's Old Trunk 3, the road that's going sort of north-south. And so this is really on the back section of lots. It doesn't have access to roads. And so our intended direction there is just basically to make that match the surrounding zoning. It was just really a remnant. It kind of got cut off when the boundary changed. Yeah, so the next one is the thought to rezone both the golf course lands and the Chester Yacht Club to the institutional zone. They fall within the current definitions of an institutional use, which in our bylaw currently includes private clubs and fraternal organizations, which I think both fall into that. I have here that we do intend to reach out to both organizations just to have a discussion with them and make sure they don't have any concerns about that. Our thought is that it would actually be a benefit to those groups. If currently the yacht club is in the waterfront residential zone, so it would limit any sort of, if there was any ever plans for expansion or even additions, it could. We'd probably be back looking at a rezoning or some sort of plan amendment. So the thought would be that if we can place those in a more appropriate zone, it would, in essence, sort of protect that property. But we're open to, if they have if they have a strong concern about it, we certainly take that into consideration.
What's the golf club present zone?
It's, I believe, low density residential. Or
Which it
rural,
is.
one of those. So yeah, exactly. It's the current zoning doesn't really match the use, and this would bring it more into conformance with the zoning. That way it wouldn't ever be deemed as a non-conforming use where it would, if it ceased operations, would have to close or anything like, same with the yacht club. So it's mostly to hopefully, get a zoning map that better matches the land use and also maybe offer some small benefits to those existing, and I think cherished organizations for the most part, well thought of organizations. So moving on, boathouses, which was a topic of a lot of conversation a few years ago and lately haven't heard as much about, but basically typically when we do hear about them, it's around the size and the use of boathouses. The actual design of boathouses typically isn't as often what people are complaining about.
People are living in them and they're not supposed to.
Right.
do it.
Yeah, and then of course, there's been a few that have been quite large that are true boathouses, but there's been, discussion about that as well. So what we're thinking here is we would limit each property to one accessory structure, which would be called the boathouse, that would be able to be built basically to the water's edge to facilitate, being a boat storage facility. One of the tricky parts in our current bylaw is we regulate what's stored in the building, which is well intended, but really hard to enforce. So, if we try to say it's for boat storage and related items, it can be easy for people year over year to move things in and out. So this would look to basically say that particular accessory structure, if you want to call it a boathouse, would be allowed to be built to the high water mark, but would not be able to be used for human habitation and would not be permitted to have a kitchen or connect to the municipal sewer system. So the intent there would be to prevent people from using them in that way that has happened in the past. Also, we would potentially consider minor design controls, although like I said, that hasn't, the appearance of them hasn't been as much of an issue as we initially thought may have been some of there.
Yeah.
Gareth, we have the ability, control the functionality of the building.
Mhm.
We've seen boathouses, so-called boathouses.
Right.
that just, they physically can't function. as boathouses.
Right.
Because they weren't designed
Mhm.
that way.
Yeah,
And they
yeah.
look like a boathouse. They're not functional.
Right.
So that was,
Yeah, I think, I mean, I think we could get fairly detailed and say it has to have a large,
Door on the water.
door
side.
on the water side and all that kind of thing. I'm not sure whether we want to go there or whether we try to just control, to so severely limit what somebody could do with it, that the incentive would be gone to create something other than.
About storage.
I think, and definitely open to.
but I'm thinking just some general wording.
Mhm.
It's gonna be a boathouse. It has to fit some general definition of functionality.
Right, yeah, I think,
I've seen
yeah.
some that are just so obviously
right,
can't be used as a boathouse.
Yeah.
The column boathouse, it offends sensibilities.
right, yeah, I think you're right, I think that's definitely possible, and I guess that's maybe something to hear, is that the level we're looking to go to or not, and maybe it is, yeah, and that's part of my question is because, like I said, when we do get complaints, it's often not it's not being used as a boathouse, but they don't care if it has the door or not. They really just care if it's
That's right.
being
That's
slept
right.
in or being
Yeah, they don't want people living in it.
right.
I mean, sorry, I'm
Andre.
Will this restriction on boathouses affect those boathouses or proposed boathouses that might be used to perform some sort of commercial work or something like that, where you have employees in there and they need a municipal sewer so that they can work?
Yeah, no, this would be sort of as an accessory structure, so that's a good point. We would want to make sure that we don't restrict a valid commercial or light industrial use that needed a sewer connection, but no, this would be aimed at sort of a residential accessory structure, but that's a good point to keep in mind.
Okay. And I think, when we're doing this regulation, we have to, how are we gonna enforce them as well?
Right.
So that's important. I mean, to say that there's not gonna be no human habitation, it's hard to, how do you?
Well, you just try to keep the kitchens and bathrooms.
Right,
out of
that it more
Somebody
so.
goes to sleep some night, so
Yeah,
then they're
that's
drinking,
right.
oh, whatever.
Yeah, typically that would be to prevent the connection to the sewer is a big one. And then, if there was some attempt to put in a washroom, then we can call Nova Scotia Environment. And if somebody called us to say, people are regularly staying here, then it could be looked into that way. But the idea is to prevent them from setting it up like with no kitchen and with no washroom. So hopefully, but then obviously we did want to allow that's why this will be a specific use as sort of this one accessory structure, because a detached garage, you could absolutely want to have a washroom in there so that you have a washroom when you're in the garage and don't have to go back to the house. So this will be specific to whether we call it a boathouse or just define it as a specific kind of use.
Derek, did you heard?
Yeah, we did, I'm looking at the next secondary garage in Burnswood, at some point. Some point in this discussion, we talked about allowing accessory buildings that aren't attached to the main building.
Right.
Is that, I didn't. see
That's
that.
on that slide that you're looking at, just two ahead here, I
It is,
think.
okay.
Yeah.
It is there. I was trying to see where, we'll come to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Can I just ask one question, and I'm not trying to play out a little bit, devil's advocate. What problem are we trying to overcome here? If somebody has a legitimate boathouse with a little loft above it where they hang out sometimes in the summer and they use the washroom and whatever, what problem is that creating that we're trying to overcome with this restriction?
Good question.
That's a good question.
Well, it doesn't stop there. I mean, you might as well say it's gonna be a secondary house. I think that's the issue.
And what's the problem?
Well,
we're trying
that's
to-
not a problem, but it develops into an apartment. But then-
What's the problem we're trying to overcome?
You don't want apartments.
One.
I think traditionally, in my opinion, it's been what we've heard from the community, from some, at least some members of the community that were in favor of it. I would also say with the pending Coastal Protection Act, that I think it would be very difficult to get an approved dwelling built.
There.
I was gonna go there in a minute.
Okay, yeah.
You beat me to it, but I don't know. I think there's a discussion that we've been sort of flirting with about having secondary suites and, you know, if that suite happened to be connected to the water or if it's up the hill closer to the house, how does it matter? It just makes the suite nicer, but I don't see any other real barrier. Jealousy, maybe? I don't know.
That's why I wanted to tie this into the accessory building discussion. That's why I was looking for that to tie it in.
We can certainly skip, maybe we'll just skip,
Just go to
skip the
that.
waterfront and we'll go to the, yeah, this one. So the,
I
oh,
was
sorry.
just gonna say, I'm glad that Councilor Bino raised the coastal, that you raised the coastal protection zone. Part of the thinking for advancing that work is safety. And so if there is a residence on the water, there's risk created by storms and storm surge. And so that's a consideration, I think, in terms of, is there a difference for council with having a bathroom there so that the user of a boathouse has facilities versus having a kitchen and a bathroom so that can be an apartment. So I think that's a consideration that you have to think about.
And I think that's the main consideration is coastal protection. But at the same time, the question is, why wouldn't we allow them?
Yeah, well, let's presume that the province is going to put in place protections for life and property through the Coastal Protection Act. If
Just make it
those
done.
criteria are satisfied, then shouldn't we be satisfied?
Well, once they have it in place, it may be redundant that we have what we have.
The acts were planned, regulations, I expect this to happen this spring.
Spring or fall is what we're hearing, but
It'll be done a lot quicker than this will, obviously. I would
Well,
think.
we
if it happens, this.
Well, we may make a change to this based on what they put in place.
Yeah, I think we have to have that discussion. I think maybe we can tie it into this second, this one.
So the
What's
way,
DU mean before you get into it? I know what you mean by DU. It's a separate
oh,
DU.
dwelling unit,
Okay.
apologies, yeah, that was just to try to, there was already a lot of text on the side,
I'm
so.
sorry, I know I missed it somewhere. I couldn't find it.
Yeah, so the thinking that I had, or basically where I had been intending here was that the boathouse that we were just talking about would be set out as a separate type of accessory structure. So not considered the same as a detached garage or what we're going to talk about here, which would be, and the terminology may change on this one too. So currently I've gone with secondary garage and garden suites. They're all similar. They're all, in some bylaws, maybe called an accessory dwelling unit. And basically it just means a smaller subservient dwelling unit to the main house. So if we stick with this terminology, a secondary suite would be a separate dwelling unit within the same structure. So that could be a basement apartment, could be an addition on the back, it could be a loft of some sort, just depending on the design of the structure. And we would look to keep the entrance for that on the side of the building or the rear, so that from the front, from the street, it would still mostly look like a single unit home. A garage suite would be a dwelling unit contained in attached garage. Typically, it's above in a loft, but there are other configurations as well. And then a garden suite would be a dwelling unit, basically that was solely contained in an accessory structure. So rather than having the garage floor with the apartment above, this just is a small building that has a unit in it, essentially. So the thinking there would be that all zones that already allow dwelling units would permit either one secondary garage or garden suite. So you can't do all three. You can pick whatever works best for your property and your, envision.
But now they can't have any. We're gonna change it so they can all have one.
Right, there's a few minor exceptions. The estate residential zone does allow a small secondary unit, but it's not quite as flexible as this would be. So yes, this would be a pretty significant change in terms of regulation, but it's something we call, or is typically called, sort of gentle or soft density, because it's not like building an apartment building where there used to be a single unit home. It's typically done in the back and the sides or in existing space, and in that way can sort of, that's why they call it gentle density, because it's not as abrasive.
But it sort of allows for the in-law thing.
Yeah.
that some.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that they currently can't do.
I
Right.
agree with this. I think it's a good idea.
And so the thinking there would be that these would be allowed, but then the boathouse particular would
Is a
be
separate-
prevented from having
So
human
it has
habitation.
to come to the, how do we
Yeah.
identify the boat?
So-
Closest to the water, is that how we define it?
We don't have currently have we would have to create that definition. So other accessory structures would have a rear yard setback, whereas the boathouse particular one would be able to build right to the high water mark. So that would be one of the distinguishing features. And then also human habitation, connection to sewer, those kind of things. So we would come up with a definition for a boathouse if we keep this direction. But Councillor Spino's question is a valid one. Outside of life safety protection, what, you know, if
People just didn't want
right.
them at the time.
Yeah, so I think that's sort of how those two would work as envisioned, but we can absolutely make.
The question was, and I think it was, what are we trying to prevent?
Mhm.
And we say that, and I think we have to answer that before we can, we have to know the answer to that.
Yeah, and that's a good
Just don't
question.
want people living in a dangerous area, that's a good reason. So,
If you look to the policy, it refers to viewpoint, to the view. That's what.
That's
It's
fine.
The existing
Keep them
policy.
relatively small.
I know.
Except there was no height limit on boathouses.
Okay.
I don't remember that.
If there was, and I know this because I know the situation where I know somebody who has a
Oh.
functional boathouse,
Yes.
he's not on the water, so he doesn't come within the boathouse definition, but it's a
Oh.
real boathouse.
Okay.
But the functionality was impaired because he couldn't make it high enough to get his boat properly.
And then there was another situation in the water access zone where you're right, there wasn't a building height limit.
And he could have built it
Could have built it,
3-4 stories.
right,
In
right.
theory,
So-
so it's sort of a.
Yeah,
there's
so,
an issue there.
so it's a tricky issue, and I also think, this is more anecdotal and opinion than it is factual, but and interested to hear what other folks around the table think, but I believe most people with a sizable boat don't build their own boathouse to store it. Typically, it's taken out and gone to a marina or some other form of storage. So typically what we're talking about is maybe for a dory or kayaks and canoes.
Haul a little speedboat into. the
Right,
winter.
so that is another potential line of thinking is we could put a size limit on boathouses too, so that they can't be, you know, really large. To Tara's point, that is another piece that I didn't mention was, you know, protecting views of the water from public streets is
That's
something
one
we
of the
see in a
big
few of our
So we do
zones.
have an example of a fairly large boathouse in Back Harbor.
Yes.
That is
Yeah.
actually used as a boathouse.
Yeah,
Real
absolutely,
boathouse.
absolutely. So that's an interesting debate is are we happy to see more of those if they are function versus form, kind of, it is really that question, do we? Yeah, so it's
Andre?
Well, I guess I think that if the real issue is architectural, an architectural issue, then we should address that with our policy. And I don't hear anybody really complaining about if somebody's sleeping there or not. It sounds like the issue that has been reported is that sometimes they're too big. But, you know, in certain zones, like maybe in the Back Harbor where it's a commercial zone, maybe big ones could be permitted. In other areas where it's primarily residential, maybe smaller ones.
Is that Back Harbor Zone Marine Industrial?
there's a section of it there, yeah, the boatyard essentially and a few of the surrounding properties.
Yeah, so like, you know, that we could be thoughtful about that. I would incline to do that and then let the province regulate where dwelling units can go in terms of life safety. That's their business. You know, I just don't really have a grievance with people building close to the water if it's permitted.
If the province comes up with this, do we then incorporate that into our plan somehow?
Well, we can't have anything that's contrary.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll basically be an extra layer, the way it's been presented so far, kind of similar to an on-site septic approval now where the province administers that, but we need that before we can issue subdivision approval. So it'd be the same thing with the Coastal Protection Act would require a site-specific assessment of the lot, and that's done by a qualified person. That report's submitted to probably our building official, who doesn't have to review the report, but just has to confirm that it's done, and then we review all of our development and.
And if they allow construction, then we allow construction.
Right.
If they don't allow construction, we can't allow
Do we
construction.
know when we're gonna have that registration?
We're talking about spring.
Yeah, but it's been years in the works, so.
The legislation.
The legislation.
Yeah, sorry, but the regulations.
I know, years ago, it was, use was a big issue, but that's years ago, but I just look here, in your staff comments, our size and use of those common complaints. So what use? What complaint are we getting about use if it's not people living in the it's an asset, right?
Yeah, and like I said, in the past, we had, there's a new boathouse and it's got, we see the toilet in there or people are staying there, and there was the, I think there were a few longstanding examples and a few within my sort of 8 or 9 years of being here that had
I'd
been
be
built.
interested just to go back, maybe if we go back to another public meeting to ask that question, because I know it was an issue and I don't disagree with the other way, but I know it used to be an issue, and when I saw your comments of common complaints, I think it's not people living in them, I just wondered what was the complaint.
Yeah, well, size and blocking the view is the big one, because like if you get down along the shore, I mean, most of these are on the other side of the road, and you won't be able to see the ocean, that's very important to people.
Yeah.
That's why we need to buy those rights away.
Yeah. Anyways,
Okay, so I'll continue to think about that one and seek some input and maybe move forward with a sort of a tentative, maybe start to ask the question of, do you oppose, human habitation if it was limited in size and some of those other things, and maybe we'll ask it that way rather than ask it rather than going forward as we're going to prohibit human habitation, we could ask it as, what do you think about allowing?
because I think the biggest one is the size and blocking views, that's the biggest.
Yeah, and if it turned out that there didn't seem to be opposition to people, using them for habitation, well, then we can probably wrap it into the garden suites and everything else,
All in one.
simplify it rather than having all these different types of accessory structures, just be one and the same. And if you built it close to the water, then, yeah.
So be it. Great. We're going backwards now.
Yeah, just back one, perfect, yes, back one slide here. So this one, so the waterfront zone, actually, we got into a lot of the similar topics there on that last discussion. So this would be a change in name for our current waterfront residential zone to name it to the waterfront zone. And the reason for that would be to reflect the proposed changes that we're talking about here. So with climate change, sea level rise, and the Coastal Protection Act hopefully being close, and then also coupled with issues of character and protecting views of the water and public street, the staff proposal here would be to prohibit new dwelling units in the waterfront zone. So that's the current waterfront residential zone. And also to consider variance policies to allow existing structures to increase their height. So as we all know, height is has been a controversial subject here, and typically our development staff do not issue variances for height except in extreme circumstances. One of those has been the boathouse property on Walker Road that was flooding each year in storms, and so there was a variance issue to allow that to get the bottom floor up so they could use it. Exactly. But probably the more significant one here it would be the prohibition of new dwellings in that zone. Currently in that zone, it's the one zone where we do have actually a setback from the high water mark of 50 feet roughly. And if you look, and I didn't include a map here, but if you look at the areas that zone exists in, I think, well, certainly all of them will come under the purview of the Coastal Protection Act. We hear that that's going to be either 80 meters or 100 meters from the coast. That just determines if you have to go through the assessment, whether you're within, say, 100 meters of the coastline. So all of that zone sits in there. And I think particularly if you look at many of the lots and the elevations, it would be prudent to consider preventing new dwelling units in there, just for all the reasons that we're talking about here. I understand that could be a, you know, difficult decision, and I'm certainly open to discussion on that. You know, that this may run a little contrary to the discussion we just had about allowing, you know, potentially allowing someone to live in a boathouse at the water's edge. So yeah, but that's just given what we see coming, and also thinking about, and I guess another important point there is to think about the lifespan of a building. So typically we're somewhere in the range of, you know, 80 to 100 years potentially for, you know, and we have lots of residential homes that are much older than that around here. So we're not just thinking about today and today's storms, but we're thinking about 2100 or 2120 even, and the effects of sea level rise and storm surge then. So it's with all of that in mind that this proposal is here, but yeah, certainly.
We're making people set back from the lakes.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes, Andre.
So for me, I would prefer, instead of putting a fixed setback from the ocean, I would prefer to refer to the Coastal Protection Act, which is far more sophisticated and takes into account foreshore, offshore slope, type of geology, the fetch, all of those factors, and comes up with actually a setback that's based on the actual site conditions rather than a blanket requirement. To me, that's a better and more sophisticated way of doing it. It actually is more meaningful and gives the same outcome in the end, and it will be required in addition to a fixed setback if we were to pursue it. And I would see sort of unfortunate if for some reason there were a property that could be developed and satisfied the requirements of the Coastal Protection Act, and we said, no, doesn't matter, the science doesn't matter, the data engineering doesn't matter, you're not allowed because you didn't meet this fixed requirement. To me, that's not a good approach.
No, it sounds like it's gonna be covered off. I just wish I knew what's covered off.
Yeah, that's the unfortunate part is, but yes, absolutely. That's that's my understanding too, is that likely they would be hit by the Coastal Protection Act before they even came to our zoning. And I, from reviewing that zone, I would think that that's probably the case.
Yeah, it looks like it's gonna be covered off.
Yeah. So I don't want to.
Well, I mean, if it comes back in the spring and it doesn't
Right.
accomplish
We
anything,
could revisit
then we
this.
could review
Yeah,
it. But I mean, I agree. I mean, if it's already gonna be done, the last thing we need to get. Yeah.
I guess the only question I would have is, what if it's not?
Mhm.
Well, then before we
Regulation
adopt,
is not.
Okay.
before we adopt, we would review it again.
I'll put a line through that, but a note to revisit if we don't have the CPA by the time we're at a sort of a draft or a final draft. Yep. Okay. Okay, so let's get, yeah, we did kind of garage suite, so on to commercial parking exemption. So this is something we talked about real preliminarily as well. So basically, the thought here is that within a portion of the sort of core commercial, so haven't defined the area specifically yet, but we're, certainly thinking Pleasant, Queen, that intersection, what we all kind of think of as the downtown, to include an overlay on the zoning map. And basically within that overlay area, basically all uses other than residential would not require on-site parking. Residential, we would still be looking for on-site parking, and the reason being that those type of uses tend to require consistent parking every day and for a substantial period of the day. Whereas commercial, you're in for an hour or two, maybe in for a meal, and then you're moving on and somebody else is using that space. In particular, within that area, and that would be part of how we determine that area, we'll be looking at lot size and lot coverage. We'll do some mapping analysis in order to come up with a proposed overlay area. And I think everybody can envision this. There's high lot coverage and there's not a lot of space. And I think we definitely have anecdotal evidence that that is limiting business development and also particular business expansion. So there is an existing provision in that zone that allows the first 1,000 square feet of floor area to be exempt from parking requirements, but then anything beyond that hits our fairly stringent parking requirement. And so the thought here would be rather than just 1,000 square feet, let's open it up. If you do have apartments above, yes, you're still going to have to find a way to provide parking. We do have a mechanism, don't think it's been used yet to allow off-site parking, and so that would be an option there. But for all other uses, it would allow for hopefully full use of those buildings down in that area. And if a new business wanted to come in, they wouldn't have to worry about, well, the old one was grandfathered and didn't need parking, but if we wanted to do whatever our idea is, we would, and that would limit us. I know of at least one or two businesses that have not gone forward with plans because of parking issues, yeah.
No, I think that's a great idea, because like a very large percentage of commercial businesses in Core now would never exist because.
Exactly.
Because they have no.
Couldn't possibly.
They have no parking. But for residential, with the new provisions, you have off-site parking for say apartments, because again, you have the same problem.
Exactly.
I've got an apartment on the second floor, I got no room, but I can do an easement or a lease
Right.
If they all park in front of the tavern, and the tavern, nobody goes there.
Right.
But there are parking lots in the village, you can acquire
You require.
a right to park there.
Yeah.
So you could use those.
Anybody got a problem with any of that?
My only comment is that somehow we have to be thoughtful about uses such as like a hotel or something like that, actually that mimics residential occupancies that, we may end up with the same sort of problem. They're not as transient as others, so I'm looking forward to some sort of proposal here.
Yeah.
Because I think the concept is good, but we have to be really thoughtful about some of those.
What are the details? Put in?
Right. And it's an interesting discussion. I mean, it's going on across North America. Lots of cities and other towns are looking at it too. And one of the things that, and it's not to say here, but actually 2 points I did want to mention before we move on from this. So one is we had our traffic and parking study here done, and that did show that we don't have a traffic or a parking problem in Chester Village. So that's, because I know that can be that's something we may and council may hear about, but so I would, I think we can refer back to that study to say that we don't currently have a substantial problem. So but it's definitely, and the other piece is that I've heard in this discussion sort of a little more wide outside of Chester is what we're saying is we're not requiring parking. We're also not preventing parking. So I think it's a valid point about a hotel or a significant use like that.
Yeah,
but
but they're
typically,
overnight, they're not 20-minute stays.
right. But typically developers would be looking to provide parking for their customers, particularly depending on the type of use. And also in terms of if we were looking at something more substantial, many in order to get financing for a lot of projects, until things catch up, a lot of those documents will refer to a minimum amount of parking. And so even in order to get your financing together to build your hotel, you may need to say, we're going to have one parking space for every. So there's a lot of pieces to it. But yeah, I think that's a good point. There's also a potential, particularly given the recent discussion, that things like hotels might be best done through a development agreement, and then we could get that as well. So yeah, great. Okay, so we'll generally proceed with that and develop that specific area. So actually following up on that. Something else we've talked about, and it's gone back and forth. The first time this came up, it was generally not well received, but I think through FBM it maybe got a little bit of life breathed into it again. So the idea here would be to create a second overlay within which each in the commercial zone, each property would be required to maintain 50% of the ground floor area as commercial space. And we would likely look so that the majority of that 50% is at the storefront. So maybe you could have 80% of the storefront or the building is storefront, and then you do have a narrow staircase to get to apartments above or something like that. But most of that is to the front. And the images here are not from Chester Village, but they're just, it's a pretty stark example, but just, it's to try to keep and create that pedestrian atmosphere, that retail atmosphere. So you get the big glass windows and wares displayed versus a blank wall, or even if you had more residential uses, it's just not as inviting and open to pedestrians.
Try to
on the
maintain
street.
commercial space in the village.
Yeah, and the thinking here is that we will try to or aim to have the same area covered by the parking overlay with this commercial requirement. And so there's a bit of a trade-off there. We're saying to, property and business owners, we're going to reduce or eliminate your need for parking, but we are going to ask, I'd say that as a give and take. This is can be seen as a burden on property owners because it's a requirement that you maintain that commercial space. And there's been discussions about, well, if we can rent it for residential, shouldn't we do that? And in a lot of cases, I think that's a good argument, but there's definitely benefit to maintaining our downtown commercial core. And once it's gone, it's really hard to get back. So I'm hopeful that with the give and take there, that this will be accepted.
Well, and a lot of times, when in our residential zones, we terribly restrict the commercial abilities.
Right.
So
Yes.
if you don't protect the commercial abilities in the commercial zones, where's it gonna go?
Is this for the downtown commercial?
Yes, yeah, we would be.
Not the highway.
No, likely, yeah. So again, that Queen Pleasant and surrounding area. And again, we'll do some mapping analysis to try to nail down that exact, yeah. Next one may be fairly straightforward. Lakefront overlay, as we're all familiar with on the municipal side, would just be to bring forward that same provision into the secondary plan. And the only lake is actually half of Stanford Lake. So A, it's simple because there's only the one, and B, this would make it consistent so that
With
folks on
everything else,
one end of their zoning may be different, but at least within that vicinity of the lake, they're going to have that same regulation. So that felt fairly straightforward, yeah. Similarly with the next one, the water courses, water bodies, and wetlands setback. So again, this is what we have in place on the municipal side. Basically, anything that's shown on the Nova Scotia 1 to 10,000 database of mapping, any streams or wetlands require a setback for any uses that require a development permit. And so again, we would look to just carry that forward so that we've got the same environmental regulations on both sides.
Yeah.
I want to speak to this. I just want to say that there's a problem in other areas where we're using this requirement of requiring setbacks from any feature on the 1 to 10,000 topographic database, because that database is not accurate. So oftentimes wetlands are shown, or water courses where they aren't, or other ones that are there are not shown. So I don't know what the answer is, but I feel like there should, at least at a minimum, we should be placing a provision for some qualified person to be able to provide a report if the developer is developing this and they find that there actually is no brook or there is no wetland, then they can actually come with a report and say that, this is actually where it is, or there is, or it isn't there, or whatever. And
Yeah,
then-
the map's inaccurate. Well, I think we did that down in Milko.
Yeah, we-
Western Shore.
Yeah, Western Shore, so we do have that provision on the municipal side, so yes, we definitely look to carry that forward. And also, I guess, just as a hopefully reassurance, so currently in the village plan, we have a map that lists protected water courses, and it's only the ones that are listed on that map. And I did a quick review and it looks very similar. So it looks like basically what's showing up on our current map and is protected is what's showing up on the 1 to 10,000. But yes, we absolutely have
There is
that.
a provision for a
Right.
specialist to come in and argue the case.
But certainly if you were doing that in maybe late August, September, the stream would be dry.
Right,
The definition of a water course, it can be dry.
yeah. And that's where we would have the professional come in to say either it is or it isn't. And if it's.
But we have that provision.
Yeah, the other piece that I haven't put as much thought into, but I did include it as a bullet point here. If we wanted to, we could also consider sort of additional policy within the village to say that if there was a lot that was extremely burdened by this, then we could consider sort of a variance policy or something beyond what we have on the municipal side. I haven't done the analysis yet to see, but with the potential of smaller lots, there, there potentially would be potentially be more impact. I don't think that's going to be a significant thing, but particularly if it's an area of concern, we could look at that too, to have a.
Doesn't hurt to have the option of taking a look at the specific circumstances.
Right. And there are some other municipal units will allow a variance, say if the setback was 20 meters, they'll allow a variance up to
If you meet
12 meters or something
if it
like
can be
that.
justified,
If it would impact the development ability.
Also, sometimes the developer will have to pay more because they have to put provisions in place in this development to protect a sensitive feature.
Right.
And that I think is because we don't care about the distance, we care about the protection.
Right.
Yeah,
So, if you don't have the distance, but you provide some other mechanism to protect the water course, that's a good solution in my view.
yeah, that's worth having in there, and you look at it every time.
Right.
Based on circumstance.
Yep.
What are we doing with farm animals?
Well, so this was one area too that we did have so it was on the survey, and there was generally pretty good support to a lot of, one of the questions was, are you aware of the current regulations? And there wasn't a whole lot of awareness about the current regulations, but there was generally support to maintain or to prohibit larger farm animals and limit things like roosters that tend to create noise and nuisance. So the thought here, or the proposal, would be to unlike what we've done in the municipal, where we really backed away from that and didn't go forward, would be to limit each property to 6 hens and rabbits. That could be a combined total, and then that basically would prohibit anything larger than that. We do have some existing properties that have horses in the village, so they would become protected under the non-conforming or an existing clause. We wouldn't love to shut them down or anything, but it would prevent new
People from having new horses.
bringing in horses or cows or pigs or that kind of thing.
You aren't thinking of having pigs.
But I'm just thinking, but you have a large acreage,
Mhm.
something to do, why would you care?
Well,
You've got X number of acres.
yeah, so it's,
I
so.
can see the thing on a small property, but you've got 50 acres or 100 acres.
Yeah, so it's, it's up for debate. I mean, I think a couple of things. There are some, but there aren't a ton of large acreages within the village boundary. When you look at it, there are a few areas, definitely. And at least one of those currently it does have horses, at least part of the year.
And cattle.
And yeah, so it's a valid question. It is something you tend to see more in towns and more urban areas where you do have these limitations. And again, we heard strongly when we went on the municipal side that we were not, ready to get into that. So it's up for debate. Absolutely. The other piece to that, and there's a couple of these that I mentioned as potential future projects, which basically means it's not going to be done as part of village plan review. It's something to consider as an additional project, would be, and this could be combined with this, or it could be, if we choose not to regulate, would be either an animal bylaw or a nuisance bylaw to really get at or even particularly with nuisance, we could get into things. It wouldn't be specific to just animals. It could be, a number of areas to address, kind of to Sam's point, to address the problems rather than just prohibiting the use outright. And that, if we chose to, could also be looked at on the municipal, to extend municipal wide, if we chose to, but, so.
This is not a project.
Yeah, exactly. So, like I said, the intended direction would be to introduce this limit, but again, open to.
So do we have a limit now?
We do. It's a little, it's something, it's more chickens, basically. It's something in the range of close to 30 chickens, a pretty significant amount, but.
Andre?
My understanding is that we control it by the number of animal units.
Right, and yeah.
So different animals, like a horse is one animal unit.
Yes.
And maybe 10 chickens is
I think it's 33, so you can have,
It is.
I think you can have less than one animal unit, right?
I don't ever deal with it. I'm interested in that idea, but I think it's to Sam's comment. If you have larger land, then it can support more, more density, or it's not density, it's more units, really. And it'd be nice if we could create a relationship between animal units and
Size of the lot.
and also it'd be nice if we could incorporate some things such as manure storage and things like that also into it, because with setbacks.
Those are the issues.
Because, I think those tend to be the problems. It's like,
Yeah.
if you just say, okay, well, it's 6 chickens, but you're in a tiny little, like, apartment sized lot. And, your neighbors can stand in their own lot and touch your chickens. That's a
That's a
problem.
problem, yeah.
Whereas,
Oh, setback,
you
especially.
may have
if
an
you got
acre,
pigs and
to
chickens.
Ross's point.
Put them close to
nobody
your
would ever
neighbors,
see
not
your
close to
chickens.
mine.
I'm putting a horse there, not a chicken. When I get a minute.
So I guess those are my comments. I'd like to have the number of units tied, maybe instead of by fixing the number, maybe somehow to the area of the lot. And then have some setbacks for the manure storage and maybe enclosures or something. That would be how I would.
Now, that all makes sense to me too. Is that a big issue for you?
No, that was actually similar to the approach that we proposed municipally, was to tie the acreage to the number of animal units. Enforcement can be tricky, but it's the same with 6 chickens, and whether it's 7 chickens or 6 chickens. So that's not a huge, I don't think a huge difference there. So yeah, we could absolutely.
You just give that one a little more thought.
Yeah, and probably revisit our farm animal and to the point on the manure storage and setbacks, that's one of the few things that we do have in a couple of zones municipally in terms of regulation. So that part of it is regulating the structures is actually the easiest part of it. So saying, barns and animal storage, like buildings that keep animals or buildings, manure storage must be, 30 meters from property lines and from wells. Those are the easiest. It's actually regulating the animals that's the trickiest part, because we get into all those questions about, what about when the calf's born, and do we have to get rid of one to, all those kind of things. But we can definitely.
The chicken got out of the coop, okay, now it's
right
running in the neighborhood.
But yes, we can definitely look at something that does tie it to the size of the lot, included with some setbacks.
Well, certain animals stink more than others, like
Some are worse
pigs,
than others.
can be quite
Yeah.
smelly, and if you live.
You don't want to be pinned up against your property line.
I have a real trouble, I have a problem with this one. We allow 30 hens now, do we, is that?
Roughly, yeah, I think I think to Andre's point, it is in a farm animal unit, and so I think it's 33 chickens makes a farm animal unit. So you could currently have up to 32 chickens, I believe.
And what area of land would that?
I don't think that's tied. I don't have the bylaw in front of me right now. But,
So you can have them if you want them.
Yeah.
At the moment.
Right.
Stop by the co-op on the way home.
So anyway, we're looking at providing some changes to that.
Yeah, we have to have some changes based on acreage, and I. Can we not allow chickens, or is that sort of a given that we have to?
Good luck with that.
You can't discriminate.
We were here last
I mean,
week.
I believe
No, I wasn't.
legally we can, but and any limitation on farm animals comes into this, food security and affordability and all those other kind of things. The reason I came in with the 6 chickens and rabbits is because that's typically what's found in other towns.
You just want a few
in
eggs,
the
that's
area.
enough.
That exactly, that lets you get your eggs and
Can we allow horses and not pigs?
enforcement, but yes, we can. Yep, yeah, I believe, that's a.
Well, I'd want to send that to our committee.
I mean, if we can say chickens and no larger, I think we could probably get into that level of nuance. I don't know why we would want to.
I'd rather have a horse next door than chickens.
Anyway, let's move on. You're gonna do some work on this.
Okay, yeah, we'll bring back some sort of a formula. Yeah.
Thank you.
And interestingly enough, outside of the survey, which, like I said, we did get strong support to limit it to prohibit roosters and prohibit large animals. There was like 60+% for that kind of thing. There was good support there. But interestingly enough, outside of the survey, we don't we don't hear about it. To that point about people can have 32 today, surprisingly, we don't get a lot of complaints about it, which I think we've always thought is a little interesting. So it may, yeah. anyway.
Don't people have 32 chickens?
Right.
I have the village. LED.
Oh, yes, thanks.
It's 20 in the.
Oh, 20? Okay.
per couple.
It just takes the right person to move in,
So that's
Yes.
it.
and then you'll hear about it.
Yeah.
Everyone made 20, it'd be quick.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, public roads.
All right, so this is a staff initiated one. This isn't something that came up on the public engagement. But basically, the idea here is whether or not we would want to require that new lots have access or frontage on a public road versus a private road. Currently, new lots require access, but it can be either on a public or a private road. And the reasoning for this, and it's not to say we're trying to become a town, I know by no means, but in towns are not permitted to have private roads at all. And part of the thinking around that has to do with infrastructure, so sewer and potentially water. If we're going to build infrastructure, we either want it to be on public land or at least with a municipal easement, so that we can get in and service it when we need to and maintain it. What we would not want to do is be building without an easement down a private lane or something like that. However, this issue also plays into the subdivision bylaw, and we know that is up for review, sort of following the village review. That's always been deemed as one of those next projects. And so there's a possibility that if we come up with a private road standard that we're happy with, then maybe this would not be necessary. And we could say part of creating a private road is giving an easement to the municipality so that they can, do services and that kind of thing. So this may be a bigger discussion, but I just wanted to raise it here. So in terms of direction, there's a number of options here. And another point I should make on this is this also does have the potential to impact to some extent our affordability discussions, because this impacts how you create new lots and allowing more flexibility for subdivision through private roads could have an impact on property value, and by allowing more. So it's a tricky balance, because we're definitely trying to promote affordability, but then we're also coupling things like fiscal responsibility and all those kind of things. So there's a lot to this.
Service, all that stuff.
So the most drastic option would be to say all new lots have to have frontage on a public street. That would be sort of like, in terms of planning and future sewer expansion plans, like that would make it the easiest, so that all new lots would have to have frontage. But it would be the most restrictive in terms of people's property rights being able to subdivide.
I don't like that.
A second option would be to say that all new lots have to have frontage on a public street if they're in a currently serviced area. So that's a little more nuanced. We would be looking at where our sewer lines are currently, and if you're outside of those areas, you kind of go by the current rules, and if you're inside those areas, you would have to have public frontage. And then a third option that we came up with after some internal discussion, we had some good internal discussion on this about the pros and cons and impacts, would be to say that we wouldn't actually change those current lot restrictions. We'd wait for the subdivision bylaw review in the hopes the public road or private road standard, but we would limit so that development permits couldn't be issued for commercial or institutional and industrial uses if they didn't have public frontage. So the thinking there is it would allow residential uses to continue to make use of private roads, but more significant developments that are going to generate more traffic and other issues. The other issue I didn't mention here with private roads, which we're probably all aware about, is emergency access. There's no standard for a private road. So we have private roads that our fire departments do not want to drive down because the trucks either get scratched because they're overgrown or they have no turnaround point at the end. And in extreme cases, you get into that with even an ambulance not being able to get in.
Oh, garbage trucks.
Garbage trucks even more so, yeah. So the third option would be maybe a bit of a softer approach in terms of it's not as drastically affecting subdivision rights, but it would say that any new commercial, industrial, institutional uses, those higher traffic generating, would have to have public road frontage, which basically means a direct access off of a public road approved by Department of Transportation. Or I guess the fourth option would be to just make, just do it as we do currently and not.
Well, it's working, isn't it?
I think it depends who you ask, and yeah, it's,
I don't know. I mean, I think that as long as the commercial development provides a suitable private interest, who cares, right? As if they don't, I guess is the problem, right? Like you're saying.
But I like your idea about if it's gonna be a private road, maybe there should be provision for municipal easement.
yes.
Oh, standard,
Yeah,
sure.
and that's all.
Because we're expected to put sewer in there, then we're gonna need an easement over that private. under that-
Oh, I get that, yeah.
And that would all be really done through the subdivision bylaw review. And
Yeah, well, that's sort of coming out.
so if we leave it as do not, like, make no changes, it doesn't mean we're not doing anything. We can
No,
still
you're
look at it that
going
way.
to make some provisions when we do the subdivision bylaw.
And
And that makes sense to me.
And our hope would be to have the subdivision bylaw, the municipal specifications, which set out our road standards, and the sewer bylaw all done as a package, so that they all speak to each other, and it takes all those things into consideration.
Yeah.
So that may be I guess is to your point, Mr. Warden, as long as council's comfortable that it's not an immediate need, we can
Just build
wait
it
and
into that.
look at that.
Are we all good with that?
Great. Scratch that one for now. Ready, we are getting there. I know this is taking a while. The next one.
Nothing's more complicated than.
Yeah, well, yeah. So the next one would be landscaping requirements. This was noted in the FBM report as being a sort of a significant part of the current Chester Village character is the street trees, obviously, but also the landscaping and garden beds that you find around. So what we would be considering here would be that as of right development, we would have a requirement for landscaping for a percentage of the lot, yet to be determined, but maybe something in the range of 25%. And typically that would be worded in a way so that landscaping could be retaining the natural vegetation that's there, or, a combination of plantings of, trees, garden beds. We also want to include vegetable garden beds as counting towards landscaping, just again for food security and affordability and all those kind of things. We would potentially look at, do different uses. Should a commercial development have a different standard for landscaping than residential? And as I mentioned, the thought would be that would be an as of right, so that basically all new development would be looking to do that. It's something that we don't have now, but I think happens generally anyway, but we would encouraging it would help, yeah. The next one, so this is similar to the waterfront zone, marine development zone. So this is a proposal to rename our marine industrial zone to the marine development zone or something thereof. The thinking would be to continue to allow, the existing boatyards and marine storage there, as well as new, if there was a new boatyard or a new sort of light industrial marine use to allow it. So continue to maintain that marine industrial capability there.
Yeah.
But also sort of open the zone up to some more commercial uses. So we're thinking of things like bed and breakfasts, possibly a restaurant,
On the water?
boat tours and rentals. We have the rope loft, which couldn't be recreated anywhere in the village today. And I mean, I think I know a lot of people, that's part of what they love about coming to Chester is going to sit out on the water and have a meal. So it would just open up some possibilities for that section of land. We also would potentially look at allowing residential uses in lots that don't have water frontage in that zone, or tweaking the zone boundaries. There's a few properties in that zone that are in residential use currently, and there's been calls to convert it completely to residential. So this would be just a tweak to try to open things up.
One will have.
Yeah, but keep the potential there for that industrial use, which we've heard all along has been an important thing. There's been comments about not losing that section. So
Everybody good with that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we're gonna take a 10-minute break.